Hello there and welcome to my paint guide for the Star Wars Shatterpoint Fear and Dead Men Squad Pack. As you can see, I sprayed the Stormtroopers white and Darth Vader black using the spray range from Colourforge. First thing I did was dry brush Vader with some Corvus black. This helps pick out all those tiny little ridges that are dotted all over his suit. I then did a 50-50 mix of Eshin Grey and Corvus Black to do another highlight. I then used some Corvus Black to start painting his cloak and the rest of the cloth on him. I didn't go all the way into the recesses because that's where I want to keep the shading. I then did a 70-30 mix of Corvus Black and Eshin Grey for the very first highlight. And this was followed by a 50-50 mix of Corvus Black and Eshin Grey for the final highlight. I then painted his lightsaber and a couple of bits and bobs on his belt with some Iron Hand steel. If you're unsure where they are, just have a quick Google and you can easily find some reference photos. All of these areas were then given a wash with some Nuln oil. I then used a tiny bit of Macragge blue to paint some of the lights on his chest plate and on his belt. I then mixed in some rust grey to the Macragge blue, about 50-50 mix, just to do the one and only highlight. I then used Mephiston red to paint his lightsaber, as well as a few more of the lights on his chest plate. This was followed by a 50-50 mix of Mephiston red and Evil Sunz scarlet. Then it was Evil Sunz Scarlet, but this was just down the edges of the lightsaber. I then repeated the process, but this time with a 50-50 mix of Evil Sunz Scarlet and Wild Rider Red. And then finally I added a little bit of white to the mix for the final highlight. I then used a little bit of Eshin Grey to highlight his lenses on his eyes. And this was followed by the tiniest of tiny dots of matte white. With Vader out of the way, we're going to start the Stormtroopers. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to start painting the black sections of the armour. And we'll use Abaddon Black for that. We're then going to thin down some Basil Canum Grey with some contrast medium, and we're going to coat the entire model with it. Try to make sure that the areas don't pool and try to make it as thin as possible because this is going to be our shading and we don't want it to be too dark. Once that's dry, we're going to paint the white areas with some Army Painter matte white. Make sure you thin the white down a little bit to make sure it's as smooth as possible, and this is going to take about 2 or 3 coats. Once the white was out of the way, I then used Jakaro Orange to paint the shoulder pad of the Command Stormtrooper. And this was highlighted by a 50-50 mix of Jakaro Orange and matte white. I then highlighted all of the black on the Stormtroopers with some Corvus Black. And I used some Nuln oil to darken the gun so that way it stands out a little bit from the hands. And all that's left to do is the base, so I use some Dawnstone to paint any concrete, which was then edge highlighted with some grey cere. XV88 was used to paint all the muddy and rocky areas, and that was highlighted with some Tau like ochre. The rims were then painted with Abaddon Black. And then finally, all the bases were given a wash with some watered down Agrax Earthshade. And once that wash has dried, that's them finished. Atomic Mass, once again, have knocked out of the park. These guys are super simple and super fun to paint. They really did not take any time at all. In fact, it was so quick that Vader only took half an hour to paint and the Stormtroopers only 2 hours. Meaning you can get these guys done in only 2.5 hours. The main thing I would say to remember when painting these guys is to make sure that the white is nice and thin. It doesn't matter how many coats you take to do the white, as long as the paint is nice and thin, you'll end up building up a very brilliant white. So take your time with it and just enjoy it, really. White isn't as hard as some people make it out to be. It is really quite easy once you just get the hang of it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this guide was helpful to you, and subscribe for more, and I will see you next time. Goodbye for now.